Hello and welcome back to Aetheral Space 16.8, The Approach. Hello.
Hi.
Hi.
How do you open chat? Let us know.
Like this, grabs my stomach and says.
I mean,
The
talk
real
about
time
putting
he's
yourself out
within.
there.
You can see a withered
Dig
arm.
deep. Alright. Shall we?
Go ahead. If you dare.
Fino Onio swung ill humor with all the grace of a musical baton, the roaring chainsaw deflecting the spears of bone with a shower of sparks each time. Now this was more like it. No more skulking in the shadows, no more scheming in the dark. They were facing the enemy head-on, exchanging blows, throwing their lives against each other. This was conflict. This was supremacy. He understood the measure of the Supreme. He'd understood all along. That man obviously didn't care one bit for the beliefs of the Tree of Might. He just played at them to keep the Tree of Might in servitude, and Xander Rain was idiotic enough to believe it. That was fine, though. Fino would play the loyal pup until he was First Branch. Then his own rebellion could begin. With a wave of his arm, Fino sent a tidal blade of blood, crashing through the remains of the panic room, where it clashed. Is it supposed to be tidal wave?
Tidal blade is what it's intended to be.
Where it clashed again, with a cleaver of bone that his opponent had grown. Nebula 6, Beckett dealt Brain an Underframe, a title passed down through the warriors of his homeland. Fino was familiar. His ability, also called Underframe, allowed him to directly manipulate his own skeleton, growing swords and shields and whatever other tools he needed right out of his bones. Blood versus bone. There was something poetic about that. Beckett Delbrainen lunged forth, discarding his cleaver and leaping off of it in the same instant. Fino waved his arms decisively, scattering a swarm of explosive blood bubbles between him and his enemy, forming a rudimentary barrier. So long as he kept the distance from his foe, Fino had the advantage. He already knew that Nebula 6 wasn't foolish enough to Nebula 6 charged right through the bubbles. Like floating grenades, they detonated, scattering bloody shrapnel and crimson flames in every direction. With a flick of his fingers, Fino diverted the blood crystals before they could bombard him, but Nebula 6 did not fall as he should have. He just continued to charge. It wasn't foolhardiness that had driven him forward. Fino saw now. He'd been confident that he could survive the explosions. Nebula 6's entire body was coated in armor of pristine white bone, his head encased in a structure shaped like the skull of a barracuda. No petty attacks would get through that, not with the silver aether that Fino could see infusing it. Nebula 6 charged through everything, the rubble, the flames, the blood, reducing everything in his path to dust as he came for his enemy. Well, a branch of the Tree of Might wasn't one to shy away from an unstoppable force. Fino threw his arms out wide, gathering the blood he'd gathered into 8 almighty blades, like the legs of a bloody spider. It was time to end this facade of fairness. These blades were his ultimate ability, the premier method of killing at his disposal. Not even a corpse would be permitted to remain. The blood bite would erase even the after-image of consciousness. Red Rum Ultima, Gore Parade! In the moment before he fired off the attack, Fino Onio thought just one thing. Was it getting cold in here, or was it just crack? Fino Onio, second branch of the Tree of Light, dropped dead to the floor. He became a Lightner.
Lightner.
His blood followed a second later. The crawling roots he'd spread across the floor, the sharpened tendrils he'd been lashing out with, even the crystals that were now embedded into nearly every surface. As one, they popped, becoming a river of red that flowed freely over the battlefield. His ability, Red Rum, had been deactivated. Skidding to a halt. Wait, is he dead?
Yeah. He dropped that to the floor.
Beckett Delbrainen narrowed his eyes as he beheld the one who'd assassinated the bastard. He didn't recognize her. She was an old woman with a severe look in her eyes and a wooden cane clutched between her 2 hands. That cane might have made her seem feeble, but Beckett wasn't fooled. He'd just seen this granny dart in behind Fino Onio and snap his neck like it was easy after all. "Who are you?" he growled, voice echoing throughout his helmet of bone. "It doesn't matter," the old woman replied, thumping her cane against the floor. "Can you fight?" "Obviously. With me, then." Without another word, the old woman turned on her heel and ran out of the panic room through one of the holes the initial attack had opened. Without another word, Beckett followed after her, out into the corridors. With the blood bastard dealt with, the panic room was probably the best place to leave his old man. At any rate, they didn't get very far. They'd barely made it out into the hallway when the old woman threw a hand out to stop him. Her eyes widened into saucers of utmost horror. Beckett followed her gaze, and when he did, he understood that she wasn't overreacting. Oh, she wasn't overreacting at all. The Supreme stood before them, silhouetted against the window, his body surrounded by a tempest of churning blue aether. It was made barely visible by the light of the mind, but he was grasping the hand of a grey statue, currents of aether running out of it and into him. As Beckett watched, the statue began to flake away, specks of dust flying off of it like a swarm of retreating flies. Dragon Hadrian glanced at them with eyes a brighter blue than ever. "Too late," he said. What was the statue? Wait, so was he, like, absorbing more aether, or is this just the fancy way of him getting the prince?
No, the statue's Perot.
Oh. This is so sad. In the end, Jamie just couldn't do it. How many futures had he stolen away? How many faces had he watched crumbled into nothingness? During his career, during his lifetime, he had poured a great deal of evil into the universe, all for the sake of goodness's eventual retaliation. It had all been part of the plan. Peace and joy for all mankind. If the plan never came to fruition, if the flowers of evil he planted never bloomed into that peace and that joy, then everything would have been for nothing. There would be no forgiveness for him then, in any version of any afterlife. Even more so if he was the one to make it all pointless with the pull of a trigger. Dragon Hadrian had spoken of his plan, of what he would do, and the prince had offered no counter-argument. Perhaps that even meant that Pyrrho himself agreed. He didn't know. He didn't even understand where the prince ended and he began anymore. Ha! What a fool he was to even think that. Right from the start, he hadn't understood anything. And so all he could do was reach out and take Dragon Hadrian's hand. As the prince had detached from him, splitting like an iceberg out into the ocean, an image drifted into Pyrrho's mind. The end of the journey he'd walked for a while. He didn't know if it was intentional on the prince's part, one final repayment for service, but he doubted it. It didn't have the kindness for just such a gesture. It wasn't the sort of thing that made gestures at all. But in that last moment, he could see it. He could see it. Peace and joy for all mankind. The end of the prince's grand stratagem. The shape the world would take. Oh God, Pyrrho thought. Oh God! Too late to do anything about it. Far too late. Too late by the time he'd been born. Jamie Pyrrho closed his eyes, and his face crumbled into nothingness. Act 2. Shining Stars. "You're too late," repeated Dragon Hadrian, rising to his feet, the statue collapsing into dust beside him. "As you can see, I've already..." The widow threw her hands out, and a torrent of white wind flowed into the hallway, coating everything in layers of frost in an instant. Even the air itself froze, producing a thick mist that obscured everything. A massive glacier protruded from the window, hurtling out of the building, blocking the escape route there. "Damn, lady," Nebula 6 breathed behind her. She ignored him. In a situation like this, there was no such thing as overboard. Her mind quickly put the pieces together. Pyrrho was dead, that much was obvious. He'd been scattered into dust. The Supreme almost certainly wasn't dead. There was no body, plus he had that Gemini world ability. So, if she was him, her next move would be to— "Down!" she barked, dropping down to the ground, and pulling Nebula 6 down with her. It was almost too late. The kick that Dragon Hadrian unleashed as he emerged from his Gemini world was truly devastating, shining with blue and orange aether. A torrent of air pressure blasted through the hallway. If that blow had made contact, the widow has no doubt she'd have been shorn in half by the force. "Under frame!" Beckett Delbanin roared, and needles like the spines of a hedgehog burst out from all across his armor, zooming upwards to skewer the Supreme in the air. It didn't work, of course. Another flash of blue aether, and a second later, Dragon Hadrian had put some distance between himself and his two opponents, next to the hole in the wall that led to the safe room. Got you. The widow understood it now. When Hadrian had used Gemini World the first time, it had been right before that torrent of cold had washed over him. When he'd reappeared, it had been directly next to his enemies, where the cold had been kept away from to keep them alive. Now he'd manifested himself on the other side of the hallway entirely, avoiding the frozen part of the building. This cold was produced by the widow's aether. It would interfere with Hadrian's Gemini world. The space in which he could remanifest was already limited. The widow would make it even more so. She gave the Supreme no time to catch his breath. Throwing her hands forward, she blasted forth a barrage of thin icicles. Hadrian dashed to the side, flipping and ducking to avoid the projectiles, but that was fine, too. Where they hit the wall, they shattered, sending a new wave of cold through the space around them. These attacks were just another way of expanding the widow's territory. She wasn't alone in her efforts. Just by looking, Nebula 6 had figured out what she intended to do, and he was already moving to assist. Gasping in pain, he snapped 2 of the spines off of his gauntlets and plunged them into the floor, and 2 seconds later, great trees of bone root burst out to cover both ends of the hallway, cutting off the Supreme's escape routes. "Here it comes!" Hadrian vanished again, and the widow readied herself. Given what she'd observed of Hadrian's abilities so far, she had a reasonable idea where he would now reappear. She'd left a safe zone of about a meter around her in Nebula 6, sparing them from the lethal chill she was projecting. That was the only infused area left on the battlefield. Whenever Hadrian appeared, he would do it within a meter of them. A flash of blue out of the corner of the widow's eye, and immediately she swung around, the reflexes honed over a career of murder guiding her. Her hands moved before her eyes could catch up. One wrapped itself around Hadrian's neck, holding him up and gripping him tight, while the other grasped his forearm and tore his aim off course. The Gemini railgun he'd been aiming at her scorched through the window instead, zooming off into the city. How long could she keep this hold? It didn't matter. She had her hands on the Supreme. He couldn't avoid her next attack. The widow took a deep breath, bracing herself for the cold, and then she saw it. 3 things at once. Dragon Hadrian's triumphant smirk. The arm that he was missing, elbow terminating in a fizz of blue aether. And in the reflection of her ice, the disembodied arm that had manifested behind her, aiming right for her back. He tricked me. Dragon Hadrian's lips moved, and even though she was gripping his neck so tightly no words could escape, she didn't doubt for a second what he was saying. Gemini railgun. Bang! The widow let the breath out, turned her head to the side, and in utter bemusement looked at the after-image the shot had left as it had flown past her and slammed into the wall. He missed? I missed? As Dragon quickly retreated, hopping in and out of Gemini World, he looked down at his arm in bemusement. That should have been a kill shot. He'd lined up the attack perfectly, creating an opening and keeping the widow's back exposed. She hadn't dodged, and he hadn't just missed her. He'd missed pathetically, the shot sailing right through the air. Ice from one side, bone from the other. Dragon launched himself up into the air to avoid both attacks at once, grabbing hold of a hanging pipe and launching off a volley of Gemini shotguns. These didn't fare much better than the railguns. They caused a great deal of destruction through their sheer volume, but that didn't change the fact that they had basically just gone wild. Shattered chunks of bone rained down, soon replaced by new attack limbs. Flames billowed for a moment, but they too were quickly snapped out of existence by the sheer cold. Shit! The bone blade sliced apart the pipe Dragon was hanging off, sending him hurtling down to the ground. Bracing himself as he plummeted, he spoke the magic words inside his mind. Gemini World! But nothing happened. Oh. Dragon realized, in the moment before his mistake caught up with him. This is you, isn't it? This was the prince. Taking the thing wasn't as simple as a handshake after all. The prince was beside his mind right now for sure, but it was still in the process of integrating with it, like software installing itself on a computer. Mental bandwidth was being consumed by that task more and more, reducing his capabilities elsewhere. Aiming his attacks, dodging his enemies, they'd all get more and more difficult until he made one mistake too many. Well, he thought grimly as the last obstacles came for him, I'd better not make any mistakes then. We did it. That was like record time for a chapter.
Wow.
God damn. Alright, Aether questions. Let's see. Sugarcane Soldier asks, I believe it might have been mentioned in the earlier arc, but I can't remember where. How much does Dragon resemble each of his parents?
It's a pretty even mix.
You have your mother's cold-hearted, dead gaze.
Precisely. And we presume the rest comes from elsewhere.
Lan asks, did Dragon know about Blackmane's plans?
He did not know.
All right. Well, thank you all for watching, and I suppose we'll see you next time. Bye.
Bye.